The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Sapphire Room, one of Chicago's most exclusive cafes, located in the heart of the Gold Coast district. It was the kind of place where a single cup of coffee could cost more than Maggie Collins earned in an entire shift. The November cold had settled over the city like a heavy blanket, and the gray sky seemed to mirror the weight Maggie carried on her shoulders every single day. She moved quickly between the marble tables, balancing a tray loaded with porcelain cups and crystal glasses. Her black uniform was impeccable, pressed with care despite being worn and faded at the seams. Maggie had learned long ago that appearance mattered in places like this, even if no one truly saw her as anything more than invisible hands serving their expensive drinks. "Maggie, table 7 is waiting." The sharp voice of Sandra Pierce cut through the ambient jazz music playing softly in the background. Sandra was the shift supervisor, a woman in her early 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a perpetual look of disdain reserved especially for Maggie. "I'm going right now, Sandra," Maggie replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. She had mastered the art of swallowing her pride, of making herself small enough to avoid conflict, but visible enough to keep her job. At 26 years old, Maggie had been working at the Sapphire Room for 3 years. It was the best-paying position she'd managed to secure after dropping out of community college when her mother fell ill. The medical bills had piled up like the snow that would soon blanket Chicago's streets, and someone had to keep the lights on in their small apartment in Pilsen, a neighborhood far removed from the glittering wealth of the Gold Coast. Table 7 was occupied by 3 women in their 30s, each wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than Maggie's rent. Their conversation paused as she approached, and Maggie immediately recognized the look in their eyes, the same look she'd seen countless times before. Assessment, judgment, dismissal. "Finally," one of them said, a brunette with emerald earrings that caught the light. "We've been waiting for 15 minutes. Maggie knew it had been less than 5, but she smiled anyway. "I apologize for the wait. What can I get for you ladies today?" The brunette exchanged glances with her companions and a cruel smile played at her lips. "Well, let's see. Can you even afford to eat at a place like this? Or do you just survive on our leftovers?" The other women laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Maggie felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. "I'll give you another moment to decide," she said quietly, turning to leave. "Wait." The blonde woman grabbed Maggie's wrist, her perfectly manicured nails digging in slightly. "My friend asked you a question. It's rude not to answer." Maggie gently pulled her arm free, her heart pounding. "I'm here to serve you, ma'am. Please let me know when you're ready to order." As she walked away, she heard their laughter follow her across the cafe. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray at the service station. Deep breaths. Just get through the shift. Just get through today. Having trouble with table 7? The voice belonged to Marcus Chen, another server and one of the few people at the Sapphire Room who didn't treat Maggie like she was beneath them. He was a grad student at Northwestern, working to pay off loans, and he understood what it meant to struggle. "Nothing I can't handle," Maggie replied, though her voice wavered slightly. Marcus frowned. "Those women are regulars. Rich, bored, and mean. Sandra loves them because they tip well, but they're poison." "I know. I just need this job, Marcus. I can't afford to make waves." He nodded sympathetically. "I get it, but you shouldn't have to take that kind of treatment." Before Maggie could respond, Sandra appeared again, her expression sharp. "Maggie, stop socializing and get back to work. Table 7 is complaining that you were rude to them." Maggie's stomach dropped. "I wasn't rude. I was perfectly professional. They're saying otherwise, and they're important clients." Sandra crossed her arms. "Maybe if you focused more on service and less on whatever sob story you're always carrying around, you'd do better here." The words hit like a slap. Marcus opened his mouth to defend her, but Maggie placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's fine," she whispered. "I'll handle it." She returned to table 7 with fresh resolve, determined to kill them with kindness no matter how they treated her. But as she approached, the brunette held up her phone, and Maggie realized with horror that she was recording. "Oh look, here comes the charity case," the brunette announced loudly, making sure her phone captured Maggie's face. "I bet she's working here because she can't get a real job. Probably didn't even finish high school." The cafe had gone quiet. Other patrons were watching now, some with amusement, others with uncomfortable expressions. Maggie felt exposed, humiliated in a way that went deeper than words. "Please," Maggie said softly. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Your job?" The blonde woman stood up, her voice carrying across the room. "Your job is to serve people who are better than you, to know your place, and your place is at the bottom, sweetheart." Tears threatened to spill, but Maggie refused to give them the satisfaction. She had endured worse. She had survived her father walking out when she was 10, her mother's cancer diagnosis, the endless cycle of bills and barely making ends meet. She could survive this. But then Sandra joined them, and Maggie's hope crumbled. "I'm so sorry, ladies," Sandra said, shooting Maggie a venomous look. "I'll be reassigning your table immediately, and I'll make sure your meals are complimentary today." "Sandra, I didn't," Maggie started. "Go to the back, Maggie. Now. We'll discuss your behavior after my shift." The injustice of it burned in Maggie's chest. But what could she do? She was powerless here. Just another struggling woman in a city that chewed up and spit out people like her every single day. She turned toward the kitchen, trying to hold on to the last shreds of her dignity, when the cafe's front door opened. The sound of rain intensified briefly, and then a silence fell over the Sapphire Room that was different from before. This wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of witnessed humiliation. This was the electric silence of fear. Maggie looked up and saw him. The man who entered was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out his expensive charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was styled back, revealing a face that was both handsome and dangerous. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and an expression of controlled power. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned every room he entered, and behind him 2 large men in black suits followed like shadows. Everyone in the cafe recognized him. How could they not? Even Maggie, who tried to stay out of Chicago's darker business, knew the face of Dante Russo. The name was spoken in whispers throughout the city. Dante Russo, the man who controlled the South Side, who had connections that reached into every level of Chicago's underbelly, the head of what the media carefully called organized crime, and what everyone else knew was the Black Mafia, the most powerful criminal organization in the city. He was dangerous. He was feared. And he had just walked into the Sapphire Room. Dante's dark eyes swept across the cafe, and for a moment they landed on Maggie. She froze, unable to look away. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through her, past the worn uniform and tired expression to something deeper. Then his attention shifted to table 7, and his expression hardened. "Gentlemen," he said quietly to his associates, "it seems we've arrived at an interesting moment." Dante Russo had built his empire on 3 fundamental principles: respect, loyalty, and the understanding that power meant nothing if you didn't know when to use it. He had learned these lessons young, growing up in the streets of Chicago's South Side, watching his father navigate the treacherous waters of organized crime until a rival family's bullet ended his reign. Dante had been 17 then, and he'd spent the next 15 years clawing his way to the top, consolidating power, eliminating threats, and building something that even the old Italian families couldn't touch. The Black Mafia, as the press had dubbed his organization, controlled everything from the docks to downtown real estate, from exclusive gambling operations to legitimate businesses that laundered money so cleanly that federal investigators had spent years trying to find a single thread to pull. Dante had made himself untouchable, a ghost in a tailored suit who signed documents with one hand while the other held the city's throat. But power, Dante had discovered, came with its own particular brand of loneliness. He had come to the Sapphire Room that afternoon for a meeting with Councilman Richard Berkowitz, a man whose campaign Dante had generously funded and who now owed him several legislative favors. The meeting was supposed to be discreet, professional, just another transaction in a life built on transactions. What Dante hadn't expected was to walk into a scene that ignited something in him he'd thought long dead: righteous anger. The moment he entered, his trained eyes took in everything: the expensive cafe with its pretentious decor, the wealthy patrons who probably thought they were untouchable because of their bank accounts, and there, in the center of it all, a young woman in a worn uniform being publicly humiliated by 3 women who reeked of inherited money and empty souls. Dante saw the way the waitress held herself, shoulders back despite the trembling in her hands, chin up despite the tears threatening to fall. He saw dignity in the face of cruelty, strength wrapped in vulnerability, and something in his chest, some part of him that remembered what it was like to be powerless, to be looked down upon, roared to life. "Vincent," Dante said quietly to the man on his left. a 6'4" enforcer whose scarred knuckles told the story of 100 fights. Who are those women at table 7? Vincent's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. He pulled out his phone, tapped quickly, and within seconds had the information. Tables registered to Melissa Whitmore, daughter of real estate mogul Charles Whitmore. The other two are Catherine Vanderberg and Christine Ashford. All trust fund babies, no real employment, known for causing problems at high-end establishments. And the waitress? Vincent hesitated. Want me to find out? No need. Dante's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. He moved through the cafe with measured steps, his presence parting the sea of tables like Moses at the Red Sea. Conversations died as he passed. Hands froze mid-gesture. Even the jazz music seemed to lower its volume, as if the piano player sensed that something significant was about to happen. Dante stopped at table 7, positioning himself directly between the 3 women and the waitress they'd been tormenting. Up close, he could see the sheen of tears in the young woman's hazel eyes, the way her jaw was clenched to keep from breaking down. She was beautiful in an understated way. Soft features, light brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a face that showed both exhaustion and determination. "Ladies," Dante said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made grown men confess their sins. "I couldn't help but notice your conversation." Melissa Whitmore's face had gone pale the moment she recognized him, but she tried to maintain her composure. Old money always did. They thought their last names were shields against consequence. "Mr. Russo," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We were just having a little fun. No harm meant." "No harm?" Dante's dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her smile crumble. "You publicly humiliated someone who was doing nothing but her job. You recorded her without consent, mocked her economic situation, and treated her like she was less than human. That's your definition of a little fun?" The cafe had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. Everyone was watching, and Melissa was acutely aware that her social standing, hell, her family's standing, could evaporate in the next few minutes depending on how this played out. We didn't mean anything by it," Catherine stammered, her voice much smaller than it had been moments ago. Dante turned his gaze to her and she visibly flinched. "You didn't mean anything. You just casually destroy someone's dignity for entertainment and it means nothing to you." He let the words hang in the air like an executioner's blade. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." He turned to the supervisor who had been watching with growing horror. What's your name?" "Sandra Pierce, sir," she stuttered, her earlier confidence completely shattered. "Sandra Pierce, you were about to discipline this waitress for the crime of being disrespected. You were going to make the victim apologize to her abusers and reward the abusers with a free meal." Dante's voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Do I have that right?" Sandra's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I was trying to keep our valued customers happy, Mr. Russo." "Your valued customers?" Dante nodded slowly. "Tell me, Sandra, what's this young woman's name?" He gestured to the waitress. Sandra blinked. "Her name?" "Simple question. You supervise her, you were about to discipline her. Surely you know her name." The pause was damning. Sandra's face flushed red. "It's Mary? Margaret? Maggie," the waitress said quietly, her voice stronger than Dante expected. "My name is Maggie Collins." Dante turned to her fully for the first time and their eyes met. Up close he could see the intelligence in her gaze, the quiet strength that came from surviving rather than just existing. She wasn't cowering or playing the victim. She was standing tall despite everything, and Dante found himself unexpectedly impressed. "Maggie Collins," he repeated as if testing the name. "How long have you worked here, Maggie?" 3 years, sir." 3 years of dealing with this? He gestured vaguely at table 7. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It's not always like this. Some days are better than others. But your supervisor doesn't know your name after 3 years. These women think you're beneath contempt, and you're still standing here with your head up." Dante's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That takes a particular kind of courage." Maggie didn't know how to respond to that. This man, this dangerous, powerful man whose reputation preceded him like a dark cloud, was defending her. It didn't make sense. Men like Dante Russo didn't care about people like her. They existed in different worlds, moved in different circles, and yet here he was. Dante turned back to Melissa and her companions. "Here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to apologize to Ms. Collins. A real apology, not the fake social kind you're used to offering when you're caught being terrible. Mr. Russo, I don't think, Melissa started. I don't remember asking what you think. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You have two choices. Apologize sincerely, or I make a phone call to your father explaining why his business permits are going to encounter unexpected difficulties for the foreseeable future. Your choice. The threat was clear and credible. Charles Whitmore's real estate empire depended on city permits, construction approvals, and a dozen other bureaucratic processes that Dante Russo could gum up with a single conversation. The Whitmore family might have old money, but Dante had something more valuable: control. Melissa stood on shaking legs and turned to Maggie. I'm sorry, she said, and even managed to sound somewhat genuine. We were cruel and unnecessary. You didn't deserve that treatment. Catherine and Christine followed suit, their apologies tumbling out quickly, desperately. Maggie nodded, accepting them with more grace than they deserved. Thank you. Dante then addressed Sandra. Ms. Pierce, you have a decision to make. You can keep your job and learn to actually see the people who work under you, or you can continue being the kind of supervisor who protects bullies and punishes victims. But you can't do both. What's it going to be? Sandra looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I'll do better, Mr. Russo. I promise. See that you do. He paused, letting his next words carry weight. Because I'm going to be checking in, randomly, and if I hear that Ms. Collins, or anyone else on your staff, is being mistreated again, I'll buy this cafe just so I can fire you personally. We clear? Crystal clear, sir. Crystal. Dante nodded once, then turned to the cafe's owner, who had materialized from his office the moment word spread that Dante Russo was in the building. Michael, isn't it? Yes, Mr. Russo, the owner said, practically bowing. Michael Torres. It's an honor to have you here. The honor might be debatable, but we'll see. I want you to give Ms. Collins a raise, a substantial one, and I want you to make sure she's treated with respect moving forward. This is one of the finest cafes in Chicago. Your staff should reflect that quality, not just your coffee. Of course, Mr. Russo. Absolutely. Consider it done. Good. Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to Maggie. Ms. Collins, if you experience any retaliation for what happened here today, you call this number. Someone will handle it. Maggie took the card with trembling fingers, staring at it like it might explode. It was simple, elegant, just a phone number embossed in black on cream cardstock. No name, no address, just access to power she'd never imagined having. Thank you, she managed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Dante's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. You were already handling it with more grace than most people could manage. I just leveled the playing field a little. Their eyes met again, and for a moment, the entire cafe ceased to exist. There was something electric in the air between them, a connection that neither could explain but both felt. Dante hadn't intended to become involved beyond making a point. He'd planned to embarrass some spoiled rich women, maybe make a statement about respect, then meet with the councilman and move on with his day. But looking into Maggie Collins's eyes, seeing the combination of gratitude, confusion, and something that might have been recognition, Dante felt something shift inside him, something dangerous and unpredictable, something that made him want to know more about the woman who served coffee with her head held high despite the world trying to crush her spirit. Mr. Russo, Vincent said quietly from behind him. The councilman is here. Dante nodded without breaking eye contact with Maggie. Tell him I'll be right there. Finally, he stepped back. Take care, Miss Collins. Chicago can be a harsh city, but it has a way of rewarding those who refuse to break. Then he was moving toward a private booth in the back, his associates falling into formation around him, and the cafe slowly returned to life like someone had pressed play on a paused film. Maggie stood there clutching the business card, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. Marcus appeared at her elbow. Did that really just happen? I think so, Maggie whispered. I'm not entirely sure. The rest of Maggie's shift passed in a surreal haze, as if she'd stepped through a portal into an alternate reality, where the rules of her world no longer applied. Word of what had happened spread through the Sapphire Room like wildfire, and suddenly, Maggie found herself the subject of whispered conversations and furtive glances. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Sandra kept her distance for the remainder of the afternoon, her usual sharp commands replaced by clipped professional instructions that maintained just enough courtesy to avoid another confrontation. The transformation was jarring, like watching a predator suddenly remember it had prey that could bite back. Table 7 had left shortly after Dante's intervention, their exit marked by a heavy silence and averted gazes. Maggie had watched them go, still trying to process everything that had unfolded. In the span of 15 minutes, her entire position at the Sapphire Room had shifted from vulnerable target to someone under the protection of the most dangerous man in Chicago. The thought terrified her almost as much as it amazed her. "You know he's never done that before, right?" Marcus said during their brief overlap at the service station. He was pulling on his coat, his shift ending just as the dinner crowd began to trickle in. "Dante Russo doesn't involve himself in petty disputes. He doesn't defend random waitresses. Hell, he barely acknowledges people exist unless they're useful to him." Maggie slipped Dante's business card from her apron pocket, studying it again as if the embossed numbers might reveal some hidden meaning. "Then why did he help me? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?" Marcus zipped up his jacket, his expression troubled. "Look, Maggie, I'm glad someone finally stood up for you. God knows you deserved it. But Dante Russo isn't a knight in shining armor. He's a crime boss. Everything he does has a reason, an angle. You need to be careful." "I know who he is," Maggie said quietly. "I'm not naive. I didn't say you were. I'm just saying that men like that don't do favors without expecting something in return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. After Marcus left, Maggie tried to push the warnings from her mind and focus on work. The dinner service was busy enough to keep her hands occupied, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment when Dante Russo's dark eyes had met hers. There had been something there, recognition maybe, or understanding. Whatever it was, it had felt significant, like two magnets suddenly aware of each other's pull. By the time her shift ended at 9 p.m., Maggie was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. The emotional roller coaster of the day had left her drained, and all she wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The November night had turned bitter cold, the earlier rain replaced by a cutting wind that swept down Michigan Avenue like an invisible blade. Maggie pulled her thin jacket tighter as she walked toward the Red Line station, her breath forming small clouds in the air. She'd need to dig out her winter coat soon, the one with the broken zipper that she kept meaning to fix but never had time for. The streets of the Gold Coast were still busy despite the hour, filled with well-dressed people heading to restaurants and bars, their laughter and conversation creating a soundtrack of privilege that felt worlds away from Maggie's reality. She walked quickly, keeping her head down, just another invisible working-class person passing through a neighborhood she could never afford to live in. She was halfway to the station when she noticed the car. It was a black Mercedes S-Class, sleek and expensive, moving slowly along the curb as if tracking her progress. Maggie's heart rate kicked up. Chicago had its share of dangers, and a woman walking alone at night was always vulnerable, no matter how populated the street. She quickened her pace, but the Mercedes kept pace. Then it pulled ahead slightly and stopped, and Maggie's hand went instinctively to the pepper spray in her purse, a Christmas gift from her mother that she'd never had to use but always carried. The rear window rolled down, and Vincent's scarred face appeared. "Ms. Collins, Mr. Russo would like to offer you a ride home." Maggie stopped walking, her mind racing. That's not necessary. The train is just... It's 9 p.m., it's 38 degrees, and you're walking through downtown Chicago with a jacket that won't keep you warm past October." Vincent's voice was matter-of-fact, neither friendly nor threatening. "Mr. Russo insists. Please get in the car." Everything Marcus had said echoed in her mind. Men like that don't do favors without expecting something in return. But Maggie was also cold, tired, and the rational part of her brain pointed out that if Dante Russo wanted something from her, he could take it whether she accepted a ride or not. At least this way she'd be warm. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." Vincent opened the door from inside, and Maggie slid into the heated leather interior. The difference in temperature was immediate and blissful. The car smelled like expensive cologne and new leather, and soft classical music played from speakers she couldn't see. Dante sat in the far seat, his suit jacket removed, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were surprisingly muscular for a man who presumably spent most of his time behind a desk. He was looking at a tablet, his expression focused, but he glanced up when she entered. "Ms. Collins, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was in the area and thought you might appreciate not having to take the train in this weather." "You were in the area," Maggie repeated, not quite believing it, but not wanting to be rude. "In the Gold Coast. At 9 p.m. just coincidentally near the Sapphire Room when my shift ended. A ghost of a smile touched Dante's lips. You're perceptive. All right, I'll be honest. I asked Michael what time you got off, and I made sure I was nearby. Is that too forward? Too forward would be understating it, Maggie said, surprising herself with her boldness. Maybe it was exhaustion lowering her filters. Or maybe it was the surreal quality of the entire day making her feel like normal rules didn't apply. You're Dante Russo. You don't give random waitresses rides home. So what's really going on? Dante set down his tablet, giving her his full attention. Up close, in the intimate space of the car, he was even more striking than he'd been in the cafe. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible, but there nonetheless. Evidence of a life that hadn't always been powerful suits and Mercedes sedans. You want the truth? He asked. That would be refreshing. The truth is, I don't know exactly what's going on. He leaned back against the seat, his expression thoughtful. I walked into that cafe today planning to have a boring meeting with a corrupt politician. Instead, I saw something that bothered me. A lot. And when I stepped in, when I looked at you standing there refusing to break despite everything. He paused. I haven't been genuinely interested in another person in a very long time, Ms. Collins. But you interest me. Maggie's pulse quickened. I'm not sure that's a good thing. It might not be, Dante admitted. My life isn't simple and the people in it tend to get complicated by association, but I'm not going to apologize for being intrigued. The car had started moving, Vincent navigating the Chicago streets with practiced ease. Maggie watched the city lights blur past the window, trying to organize her thoughts. Where do you live? Dante asked. Pilsen, near 18th and Ashland. She saw his slight nod of recognition. Pilsen was a working-class neighborhood, predominantly Hispanic, filled with colorful murals and family-owned restaurants, about as far from the Gold Coast as you could get while still being in the same city. Tell me about yourself, Dante said. Not the resume version, the real version. Maggie turned to look at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or manipulation, but found only genuine curiosity. Why do you care? Because most people I meet want something from me, he replied. They're either afraid of me, trying to use me, or pretending to like me because of what I can do for them. You look at me like I'm a problem you're trying to solve. It's refreshing. Despite herself, Maggie laughed, a short, surprised sound. You are a problem I'm trying to solve. Nothing about today makes sense. Fair enough. Dante's smile was warmer now, more genuine. So help me understand. 3 years at the Sapphire Room, dealing with people like those women every day. Why stay? The question opened something in Maggie that she usually kept locked tight. Maybe it was the darkness of the car, the anonymity that came with confessing to a stranger, or maybe it was the fact that Dante Russo, despite being one of the most powerful men in Chicago, was actually listening to her like her words mattered. My mom has stage 3 breast cancer, she said quietly. The treatments are expensive, even with insurance. I dropped out of community college 2 years ago to work full-time, because someone had to keep us afloat. The Sapphire Room pays better than most service jobs, and the hours are consistent. So I take the abuse because the alternative is losing our apartment or letting my mom go without treatment. The car's interior was silent except for the soft hum of the engine. Dante's expression had shifted, something harder and more focused entering his gaze. Your father? Left when I was 10. Haven't heard from him since. Maggie shrugged, trying to keep the old hurt from showing. It's just been me and my mom for a long time, and now that she's sick, you're carrying everything alone. Dante finished. Pretty much. Maggie looked down at her hands, noticing for the first time how rough they'd become from constant work, the hands of someone who scrubbed and lifted and never stopped moving. But that's life, right? You do what you have to do. Not everyone does, Dante said. Most people in your situation would have given up, found easier paths. The fact that you haven't says something about your character. They were entering Pilsen now, the streets narrower and more crowded with parked cars, the buildings shorter and more worn than the gleaming towers of downtown. Maggie directed Vincent to her apartment building, a 3-story walk-up that had been built in the 1920s and looked like it hadn't been updated since. The Mercedes stopped at the curb, looking absurdly out of place among the beat-up Hondas and Toyotas that lined the street. Maggie reached for the door handle, then hesitated. Thank you, she said, for today, for this, for listening. Maggie. The use of her first name, spoken in Dante's deep voice, sent an unexpected shiver through her. Can I ask you something? I suppose you've earned that right. If you could change your situation, not just improve it but fundamentally change it, would you? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Dante leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes intense. I mean, if someone offered you a way out of the struggle, a chance to give your mother the best treatment available, to not have to smile through abuse for a paycheck, to actually live instead of just survive, would you take it? Maggie's heart was hammering now. That depends on what the someone wanted in return. Smart answer. Dante pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at her. I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to think about it seriously before you answer. No pressure, no obligation, just consider it. All right, Maggie said slowly. I need someone I can trust in certain social situations, someone who can navigate high society events, who understands what it's like to struggle, but can hold her own in rooms full of sharks. He paused. Someone who won't be intimidated by power or wealth because she's already survived worse than anything they can dish out. You want to hire me? Maggie said, understanding dawning. As what, exactly? Think of it as a personal assistant position, but more social than administrative. You'd accompany me to events, help me read rooms, provide a human perspective on things. In return, I'd pay you more than you'd make in 5 years at the Sapphire Room, cover your mother's medical expenses completely, and ensure you both have a comfortable place to live. It was too good to be true. Everything in Maggie's experience screamed that offers like this didn't exist without massive hidden costs. Why me? She asked. You could hire anyone. Someone with experience, connections, education. Because everyone with those things wants something from me, Dante replied. They see me as a stepping stone or a threat. You see me as a person who happened to help you when you needed it. That's rare in my world, Maggie, rare enough to be valuable. The Mercedes idled at the curb, warm and safe, while outside the November wind rattled the bare tree branches. Maggie looked at the business card still in her hand, then at Dante's face, trying to read the truth behind his words. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Dante handed her a different card, this one with an actual name and email address. When you decide, reach out. And Maggie, whatever you choose, today's intervention stands. No one at the Sapphire Room will bother you again. That's not contingent on anything. Maggie nodded, clutching both cards, and stepped out into the cold. Vincent had appeared to open her door, and she murmured thanks before hurrying toward her building. It wasn't until she was inside her apartment, leaning against the closed door with her mother already asleep in the bedroom, that Maggie let herself fully process what had just happened. Dante Russo had offered her a way out, a dangerous, complicated, potentially life-changing way out. And the terrifying part was that she was actually considering saying yes. Maggie didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the tiny room she'd called home for the past 8 years, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of some undiscovered country, and replayed every moment of the day in her mind. The humiliation at the Sapphire Room felt like it had happened weeks ago instead of hours, already displaced by the surreal encounter with Dante Russo. Through the thin wall separating their rooms, she could hear her mother's labored breathing, the sound that had become the soundtrack of Maggie's life over the past 18 months. Each inhale was a reminder of why she worked double shifts, why she endured abuse from customers who saw her as less than human, why she'd abandoned her dreams of finishing college and maybe, someday, becoming a social worker. Elena Collins had been a force of nature once. A bilingual teacher at a local elementary school, she'd raised Maggie alone after her father left, working long hours and still managing to make their small apartment feel like a home. She'd taught Maggie that dignity wasn't about money or status. It was about how you treated others and how you carried yourself through hardship. The cancer had stolen so much of that vitality. The chemotherapy made her weak, nauseous, barely able to keep food down. The medical bills had forced them to make impossible choices: medications or groceries, treatment or rent. They'd been surviving on a knife's edge for so long that Maggie had almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe without that constant pressure on her chest. And now Dante Russo was offering her a way out. She pulled his business card from her nightstand, studying it in the dim light filtering through her threadbare curtains. The embossed numbers seemed to pulse with possibility and danger in equal measure. One phone call could change everything, or destroy everything. The question was, which outcome was more likely? Marcus's warnings echoed in her mind. Dante Russo isn't a knight in shining armor. He's a crime boss. Everything he does has a reason, an angle. But Maggie had spent 3 years watching the wealthy elite of Chicago operate at the Sapphire Room, and she'd learned something important. Everyone had an angle. The society women who treated her like furniture had angles. Sandra, who protected bad customers because they tipped well, had an angle, and even Marcus, as kind as he was, stayed friendly with her partly because she covered his shifts when he had exams. At least Dante had been honest about what he wanted. There was something almost refreshing in that transparency, even if the offer itself was wrapped in complications she couldn't fully anticipate. Maggie must have dozed off eventually because she woke to thin morning light and her mother's gentle knock on her door. "Mija, are you awake?" "Yeah, Mom. Come in." Elena shuffled into the room wearing her worn bathrobe, a colorful scarf wrapped around her head where her hair had thinned from treatment. Despite the ravages of illness, she still had that quiet strength in her eyes, the same strength Maggie had inherited, and that had allowed her to stand tall yesterday in the face of cruelty. "You came home late," Elena said, settling carefully on the edge of Maggie's bed. "Rough shift?" Maggie sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. "You could say that. Mom, something happened yesterday. Something. Complicated." Over the next 20 minutes, Maggie recounted everything: the humiliation at table 7, Dante's intervention, the ride home, and finally, the job offer. She left nothing out, knowing that her mother's wisdom was one of the few resources she could fully trust. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through concern, surprise, and something that might have been cautious hope. When Maggie finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. "This man," Elena said finally, "Dante Russo. I know that name. Everyone in Chicago knows that name. He's dangerous, Maggie. I know. But he helped you when no one else would." Elena's fingers traced the pattern on Maggie's worn comforter. "And he's offering to help us when we desperately need it. The question is why," Maggie said. "What does he really want from me?" Elena smiled sadly. "Mija, I've lived 53 years and I've learned that people are rarely purely good or purely bad. Your father, he was charming and kind when we met, but he couldn't handle responsibility when it got hard. Some of the wealthiest people I've taught in parent conferences were the most selfish, while some of our poorest families would give you their last dollar if you needed it. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Dante Russo might be a criminal, but he also saw someone being hurt and chose to help when he didn't have to. That tells me something about his character, even if it's complicated." Elena reached out and took Maggie's hand. "But this decision can't be about me or my medical bills. You have to think about what this means for your life, your future." "Mom, your treatment will continue either way," Elena interrupted firmly. "We'll find a way. We always do. What I won't do is let you sell yourself into something dangerous just to save me. I'd rather die with dignity than live knowing I cost you yours." Tears burned in Maggie's eyes. "Don't talk like that. I'm being practical." Elena squeezed her hand. "If you take this offer, it has to be because you believe it's the right move for you, not just a way to pay medical bills. Do you understand?" Maggie nodded, not trusting her voice. "So ask yourself, do you trust him?" "Not completely. I'm not asking you to be naive, but do you trust him enough to take this risk?" That was the question, wasn't it? Maggie thought back to the car ride, to the way Dante had listened when she talked about her mother, to the genuine interest in his eyes when he'd asked about her life. She thought about how he could have ignored the situation at the Sapphire Room entirely, or simply embarrassed the women and moved on. Instead, he'd made sure Maggie was protected, had given her his personal contact information with no strings attached. He'd shown her respect when the rest of the world seemed determined to grind her down. "I think I trust him enough to find out," Maggie said slowly. "But I need to know more before I commit to anything." Elena smiled. "Then that's your answer. Meet with him, ask questions, set boundaries, and trust your instincts. They've kept you safe this long." After her mother returned to her room to rest, Maggie showered, dressed in her nicest casual clothes, jeans without holes and a sweater that didn't have stains, and stared at Dante's card for another 10 minutes before finally pulling out her phone. She typed out a text message to the number on the business card 3 times before settling on something simple. "This is Maggie Collins. I'd like to discuss your offer. When would be convenient to meet?" The response came within 2 minutes. "Today, if possible. I can send a car to pick you up at noon. There's a restaurant in River North where we can talk privately." Dr. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she typed back, "Noon works. But I'll take the train. Just send me the address." Another quick response, "Independence. I respect that. See you at noon. 347 West Erie Street." 3 hours later, Maggie stood outside a restaurant that looked like it cost more per entree than she made in a week. The exterior was understated elegance, dark wood and frosted glass, with a discreet brass plaque bearing the name Giordano's private dining. A valet stood at attention, and Maggie suddenly felt acutely aware of her discount store clothing and practical boots. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The interior was even more intimidating. All dark leather, soft lighting, and the kind of quiet that came from serious money. A hostess who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine greeted Maggie with a professional smile. "I'm here to meet Dante Russo," Maggie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The hostess's smile warmed several degrees. "Of course. Ms. Collins, correct? Mr. Russo is expecting you. Right this way." They walked through the main dining area, currently empty except for two men in suits who nodded respectfully as they passed, and into a private room at the back. It was smaller, more intimate, with a single table set for two and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small courtyard garden. Dante stood as she entered, and Maggie was struck again by his presence. In daylight, in the elegant surroundings, he looked every inch the powerful businessman. Three-piece navy suit, crisp white shirt, perfectly styled dark hair. But there was also something else, a carefully controlled intensity that suggested danger lurking beneath the polished surface. "Maggie, thank you for coming." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please sit. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, wine, water?" "Water is fine," Maggie said, settling into the chair. The leather was butter soft, the table probably worth more than everything in her apartment combined. Dante poured water from a crystal pitcher, his movements precise and economical. "I'm glad you reached out. I wasn't sure if you would." "I almost didn't," Maggie admitted. "This whole situation is surreal." "I can imagine." Dante sat back, his dark eyes studying her with that same focused intensity from the car. "What made you change your mind?" "I didn't change my mind. I'm here to ask questions before I make any decisions." Maggie met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "My mother taught me that knowledge is the only real power people like us have, so I need to know exactly what I'd be getting into." A slow smile spread across Dante's face. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. All right, let's be completely transparent. Ask me anything." Maggie pulled out her phone, where she'd typed a list of questions during the train ride. "First question, what exactly would this job entail?" "You said social situations and events, but I need specifics." Dante nodded, leaning forward slightly. "My business, both legitimate and otherwise, requires a significant amount of social interaction. Charity galas, business dinners, political fundraisers, private parties, places where deals are made and alliances are formed. I need someone who can accompany me to these events, help me navigate the social dynamics, and honestly, provide a different perspective than what I usually get from my associates." "A different perspective meaning what?" "Most people in my world think in terms of power, money, and leverage. You think in terms of people and survival. That makes you valuable in situations where reading a room or understanding motivations is crucial." He paused. "Also, having someone like you by my side, someone genuine, someone who isn't part of the criminal world, makes me appear more human, more approachable." "So I'd be a prop," Maggie said flatly. "Something to make you look better." "No." Dante's response was immediate and firm. "You'd be a partner in specific contexts. A collaborator. I have plenty of props. I don't need another one. What I need is someone intelligent enough to see things I miss and honest enough to tell me about them." Maggie studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Second question, would I be expected to do anything illegal? No. I compartmentalize my business carefully. The people who handle my illegal operations never interact with my social circles and vice versa. You would be firmly on the legitimate side of things. But I'd know who you are and what you do. "You already know that," Dante pointed out. "The only difference is you'd be in my proximity more often. And yes, that comes with risks. People who oppose me might see you as leverage. That's why you'd have security, discreet, but constant." "Security." Maggie felt her stomach tighten. "You mean bodyguards." "I mean protection. It would be non-negotiable if you took the position. Your safety and your mother's safety would be my responsibility." The mention of her mother brought Maggie to her third question, the one that mattered most. "You said you'd cover my mother's medical expenses." "All of them. Every penny. I have connections with the best oncologists in the country. She'd receive treatment at Northwestern Memorial with doctors who specialize in her type of cancer. Cutting-edge therapies, clinical trials if appropriate, around-the-clock care, whatever she needs." It was almost too much to process. "And what happens if I take this job and it doesn't work out?" What happens to her treatment then? Dante's expression softened. I'm not a monster, Maggie. If you decide after a month or a year that this isn't for you, your mother's treatment continues regardless. I'd put it in writing. Her medical care is guaranteed for as long as she needs it, independent of your employment status. Why? The question burst out of Maggie before she could stop it. Why are you willing to do all of this? It can't just be because you need someone to attend parties with you. You could hire a dozen people with better credentials than me. Dante was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more personal. When I was 17, my father was killed by a rival family. They dumped his body in an alley like garbage. My mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and she got sick. Ovarian cancer. We couldn't afford treatment. She died 6 months after my father, and I was left alone with nothing but rage and determination. He paused. I built everything I have now from that nothing, but I've never forgotten what it felt like to be powerless, to watch someone you love suffer because you can't afford to help them. Maggie felt something shift in her chest. You see yourself in me. I see someone refusing to break despite impossible circumstances. I see dignity in the face of cruelty. I see someone worth investing in. Dante leaned forward. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, Maggie. I'm asking you to take a calculated risk. Work with me for 3 months, a trial period. If at any point you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, you walk away with 6 months' salary and your mother's treatment guaranteed. If it works out, we continue on mutually agreed terms. It was a good offer, almost too good. But Maggie had learned to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were telling her that Dante Russo, for all his danger and complications, was being genuine. I have conditions, she said. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. First, everything you've promised goes in a legal contract, not just verbal agreements. Done. Second, I maintain my own apartment. I'm not moving into some penthouse or mansion where I'm constantly under surveillance. Dante smiled slightly. I can work with that, though I reserve the right to upgrade your security in that apartment. Non-negotiable. Third, I'm not sleeping with you. I'm not. If that's part of what you're expecting, it's not. Dante's voice was firm. Let me be crystal clear. This is a professional arrangement. If something personal develops over time, that would be separate and entirely your choice. But it's not part of the job requirements, and you'll never be pressured in that direction. Do I find you attractive? Yes. But that doesn't mean I expect anything from you beyond the work we've discussed. Maggie felt her cheeks warm but pushed forward. Fourth, my mother doesn't get involved in any of this. She stays completely separate from your business world. Agreed. She'll be treated as a private citizen receiving medical care, nothing more. And fifth, Maggie took a deep breath. If I do something that genuinely upsets or disappoints you, you tell me directly. I've spent 3 years dealing with passive-aggressive supervisors and customers who take out their frustrations on service workers. I need honesty, even if it's harsh. Dante extended his hand across the table. I can promise you honesty. Sometimes brutal honesty given my background, but never dishonesty. Do we have a deal? Maggie looked at his hand. Strong, slightly scarred. The hand of someone who'd built an empire through force of will. She thought about her mother's labored breathing, about the stack of medical bills on their kitchen counter, about the future that seemed to narrow a little more each day. And she thought about yesterday, about standing tall in the face of humiliation, about the moment when someone had finally seen her as worth defending. She reached out and shook Dante's hand. 3-month trial, she said. After that, we reassess. Dante's smile was genuine, transforming his face from dangerously handsome to almost boyish. 3 months. Welcome to the team, Maggie Collins. As they discussed logistics and start date, salary details, the contract that would be drawn up, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. And as she left the restaurant 2 hours later with a check for her first month's salary already in her purse, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped off a cliff. She could only hope that Dante Russo would be there to catch her when she fell. The next 2 weeks moved with the dizzying speed of a train Maggie couldn't slow down. She gave her notice at the Sapphire Room, a conversation that left Sandra pale-faced and stammering apologies that came far too late to mean anything. Michael Torres, the owner, had tried to convince her to stay with promises of promotions and raises that would never materialize, but Maggie declined politely. That chapter of her life was closed. Her mother's first appointment at Northwestern Memorial came 3 days after Maggie signed the contract with Dante. The facility was a world apart from the overcrowded clinic where Elena had been receiving treatment. Private rooms, attentive nurses, and Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the country's leading oncologists, who spent an hour reviewing Elena's case with a thoroughness that brought tears to Maggie's eyes. "We have options, Doctor," Chen had said, her voice calm and professional. "New immunotherapy treatments that weren't available when your mother was first diagnosed. The insurance Mr. Russo arranged covers everything, including experimental protocols if we decide they're appropriate." Watching her mother's face light up with something that looked dangerously close to hope was worth every risk Maggie was taking. The apartment upgrades came next. Dante had been true to his word about not forcing her to move, but the security improvements were extensive. New locks, a camera system, reinforced door frames. A man named James, mid-40s, former military with kind eyes, was assigned as her primary security detail. He was discreet, professional, and somehow managed to be constantly present without being intrusive. "Think of me as a very boring shadow," he'd said during their first meeting. "You'll barely notice I'm here." But the biggest transformation was Maggie herself. Dante had arranged for a stylist named Patricia Delgado, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd dressed Chicago's elite for 3 decades, to help Maggie build a wardrobe appropriate for the events she'd be attending. The first shopping trip had been overwhelming. "You have good bone structure and natural poise," Patricia had said, circling Maggie like a predator assessing prey. "We're not trying to change who you are, just elevate your presentation. The goal is confidence, not costume." 4 hours and more money than Maggie had earned in 6 months later. She had a closet full of elegant dresses, tailored suits, and shoes that actually fit properly. Patricia had also arranged appointments with a hairstylist, a makeup artist who taught Maggie techniques for different occasions, and even an etiquette coach named Helen Mercer. Helen was a retired socialite who'd agreed to work with Maggie as a personal favor to Dante. Over 3 intensive sessions, she'd covered everything from formal dining protocols to reading social hierarchies at events. "The key," Helen explained during their second meeting, "is understanding that these gatherings are theater. Everyone is playing a role. Your advantage is that you're authentic in a world of performance. Don't try to be them. Be yourself, just more polished." The first real test came on a Friday evening, 2 weeks after Maggie had accepted Dante's offer. A charity gala at the Art Institute benefiting children's hospitals. Ironic, given that the event's host was being investigated for healthcare fraud, but Helen had taught her that hypocrisy was currency in these circles. Dante picked her up himself, arriving in a midnight blue Bentley that made James's security sedan look pedestrian. When Maggie emerged from her building in a floor-length emerald dress that Patricia had insisted brought out her eyes, Dante's expression shifted in a way that made her pulse quicken. "You look stunning," he said simply, offering his arm. "I look expensive," Maggie corrected, trying to calm her nerves. "There's a difference." "No, you look like yourself, just properly framed." Dante helped her into the car. "Remember what we discussed. Stay close, observe, and if anyone makes you uncomfortable, squeeze my arm twice. I'll extract us." The gala was everything Maggie had imagined and worse. The Art Institute's grand halls were filled with Chicago's elite, politicians, business moguls, society matrons dripping in jewelry that could fund a small country. She recognized several faces from the Sapphire Room, including Melissa Whitmore, who went pale when she spotted Maggie on Dante's arm. "Breathe," Dante murmured as they entered. "You belong here as much as anyone." The evening became a masterclass in social warfare. Maggie watched as Dante navigated conversations with surgical precision, making deals disguised as pleasantries, collecting information while appearing to make small talk. And she began to understand why he'd wanted her there. During a conversation with Alderman Patricia Knox, a woman Helen had warned was ambitious and ruthless, Maggie noticed the politician's eyes kept darting to her assistant, who was frantically typing on her phone. Maggie squeezed Dante's arm twice. He smoothly excused them, and once they were away from the crowd, he asked, "What did you see?" "Knox is stalling. Her assistant is texting someone, probably getting instructions. Whatever deal you're discussing, she's not the decision maker. Someone else is pulling strings." Dante's smile was approving. "That's exactly the kind of insight I need. Knox has been playing independent, but if someone's controlling her votes." He pulled out his phone. "Vincent, I need you to find out who Patricia Knox has been meeting with privately, within the hour." As the night progressed, Maggie found herself relaxing into the role. She wasn't pretending to be someone else, she was simply being Maggie Collins with better clothes and a clearer understanding of the game being played around her. Near midnight, as the event wound down, a man approached them. He was late 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that looked friendly but had calculating eyes. Richard Castellano, a name Maggie had heard Dante mention with a mixture of respect and caution. "Dante," Castellano said warmly, "and this must be the young woman everyone's been talking about. Maggie Collins, correct?" "That's right," Maggie replied evenly. "I knew your mother," Castellano said, and Maggie's guard went up instantly. "Elena Collins. She taught my granddaughter at Benito Juarez Elementary. Wonderful teacher. I was sorry to hear about her illness." "Thank you," Maggie said carefully. Castellano's eyes shifted to Dante. "You've chosen well. Someone with actual roots in this city, not just money and ambition." He paused. "My granddaughter sends her regards to Mrs. Collins, and Maggie, your mother would be proud of you." After he left, Maggie turned to Dante. "Who is he really?" "Someone who just gave us valuable information without saying anything directly," Dante replied. "Castellano runs the Northside operations. By acknowledging your mother and being respectful, he's signaling that you're under protection. Not just mine, wider protection. Because of my mother's reputation, because respect in communities like Pilsen carries weight that money can't buy. Castellano's granddaughter probably loved your mother, which means his family remembers. That makes you untouchable to certain elements." On the drive home, Maggie was exhausted but energized. "I think I'm starting to understand this world." "You're a natural," Dante said. "Tonight confirmed what I suspected. You see things others miss because you're not blinded by privilege or greed." As they pulled up to her building, Dante walked her to the door despite James's presence. "Same time tomorrow? There's a political fundraiser that could use your particular perspective." "Same time tomorrow," Maggie agreed. But as she lay in bed that night staring at her ceiling, Maggie realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was good at this, and more concerning, she was starting to enjoy it. 3 months passed in a blur of galas, meetings, and whispered conversations in rooms where power changed hands like currency. Maggie had become fluent in the language of Chicago's elite, moving through their world with a grace that surprised even her. Her mother's health had improved dramatically under Dr. Chen's care, the new treatments shrinking the tumors in ways the previous doctors had said was unlikely. But success came with complications Maggie hadn't anticipated. She'd grown closer to Dante, dangerously closer. Their relationship had remained professional, but the line between business and personal had begun to blur during late-night strategy sessions, shared laughter over the absurdity of pompous socialites, and moments when their eyes met across crowded rooms and spoke volumes without words. It was during a Thursday evening in late February when everything changed. Dante had called an emergency meeting at his office in the Loop, a penthouse suite overlooking the Chicago River. Maggie arrived to find him standing at the window, his usual composure shattered. Vincent and 2 other associates were present, their expressions grim. "We have a problem," Dante said without preamble. "Marcus Romano is making a move." Maggie's blood ran cold. Marcus Romano ran the West Side operations and had been a thorn in Dante's side for years. Helen had warned her about the Romano family during their sessions. Old money criminals who believed they owned Chicago before Dante built his empire. "What kind of move?" Maggie asked. "The kind that targets weakness." Dante turned to face her, and Maggie saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, for her. "He knows about you. About what you mean to my operation. About your mother." The words hit like a physical blow. "He's threatening her?" "Not directly. Romano is too smart for that. But he's been asking questions, making inquiries at Northwestern Memorial. He's probing for leverage." Dante crossed to her, his voice low and urgent. "I need to tell you something I should have told you months ago. Something that changes everything." Maggie's heart hammered. "What?" Dante took a breath, and when he spoke, his words rewrote her entire understanding of their relationship. "Your father didn't just walk out on you and your mother when you were 10. He was killed. By my father's organization, during a territorial dispute 20 years ago. Your father, Michael Collins, worked for the Romano family as an accountant. He knew too much, tried to leave, and my father ordered his execution." The room tilted. Maggie grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "What?" "I didn't know when I met you. I swear I didn't know." Dante's voice was raw with something that sounded like desperation. "But after I hired you, I had Vincent run a complete background check. Standard procedure for anyone close to me. That's when I discovered the connection." Your father's murder is in my family's records. Maggie's mind reeled. Every abandoned birthday, every lie her mother had told her about her father leaving to protect her from the truth, every moment she'd blamed herself for not being enough to make him stay, all of it had been built on a foundation of violence that connected directly to the man standing before her. "You've known for 3 months," she said, her voice shaking with fury and betrayal. 3 months you've known that your family murdered my father, and you said nothing? I was trying to find the right time. The right time? Maggie's laugh was bitter. When would that be, Dante? After my mother died from the cancer treatments you're paying for? After I'd become so dependent on you that I couldn't afford to walk away? That's not fair. Fair? Maggie's voice rose. My father's murder isn't fair. You lying to me isn't fair. Using me while knowing what your family did to mine isn't fair. Vincent cleared his throat. Boss Romano knows this too. That's his play. He's going to expose the connection publicly, make it look like you've been manipulating her. It'll destroy your reputation with the families who respect blood debts. Dante's jaw clenched. I don't care about my reputation. I care about keeping Maggie and her mother safe. Then you should have told me the truth from the beginning. Maggie grabbed her purse, tears streaming down her face. I need to go. I need to think. Maggie, please. Dante reached for her arm. Don't touch me. The words came out cold, final. And stay away from my mother. Whatever protection you think you're providing, we don't want it. Not anymore. She made it to the elevator before the sobs overtook her, James following silently, his expression sympathetic but professional. In the car, she finally asked the question burning in her mind. Did you know? About my father? James hesitated, then nodded. I was told when I was assigned to you. I'm sorry, Maggie. Another betrayal. Another lie by omission. Maggie stared out at the Chicago skyline, at the city that had taken so much from her and given back only complicated truths wrapped in blood money. When she reached her apartment, her mother was waiting, having heard the commotion. Mija, what happened? And Maggie told her everything, about Dante's revelation, about their father's true fate, about the web of violence and lies they'd been caught in. Elena's face went ashen, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. Your father tried to leave that life. He wanted better for us, that's why they killed him. Did you know it was Dante's family? No. The police told me it was gang violence. I never knew specifics. Elena pulled Maggie into her arms. But now we do. So what are you going to do? Maggie pulled back, wiping her tears. I'm going to end this. Romano, Dante, all of it. I'm going to find a way to protect us that doesn't require selling our souls. But even as she said it, Maggie knew the truth. She was already too deep. And in Chicago's underworld, there was no clean way out. Only survival.